Can you prove that Jesus is not real?
In terms of if you want to ask, do we think there was a historical Jesus? My answer is there probably was. But whatever scant and minuscule evidence we have, does any of it go to prove any of the supernatural claims about that character that are made in the Gospels? No, we have nothing like that at all.
I don't know whether there was or not. I think it's too far back in history for historians to really be sure, and there's not enough contemporary writings about it.
The God that Christians believe in is amazingly stupid if it wants to actually achieve its goal of spreading this information to humanity by relying on text, by relying on languages that die off, by relying on anecdotal testimony. That's not a pathway to truth.
Have you ever wondered if you could prove to a non-believer that Christ existed, or even better, that he was actually the Messiah? Christians believe that Jesus came down to earth as a man to save humanity from their sins. I mean, why wouldn't we? We have access to the greatest book known to man that tells us the truth, the Bible. It details his birth, what he was like, and the amazing miracles he performed. Jesus provided us with a blueprint to live by, leaving us with the security of what is and what is to come. Unfortunately, not everyone believes that the Bible is actually true. But what if there was evidence outside of the Bible that proves Jesus' existence? Numerous people have started on missions to prove that the Lord we worship never came to earth as a man, but they haven't succeeded. We have all the evidence to actually prove that Jesus was a man who walked the earth, but it isn't without people that still believe that our Jesus was just a ghost in a story. Can we prove Jesus actually walked on the same ground that we did? Stay until the end to find out. Let's start out with the cold, hard proof. Now, the proof of things in today's world looks vastly different than thousands of years ago. You can't prove that anyone existed thousands of years ago through things like fossils, bones, or selfies that they took. But what we do have is writings. We know that a lot of people that aren't Christians believe that the Bible was written with bias. But what if people who didn't buy Jesus' teachings of God and creation wrote about him? To get into that, we first have to talk about how we can know that historical writings are real or if someone is just making up a story. Without getting too into the science of it all, historians use a basic structure to verify historic records through something called internal and external criticism. In short, external criticism determines if a record is written by a genuine person, and internal criticism determines if the words on the page are true. External criticism looks at whether the person that wrote it uses language that was used during the time and place, leaves out information that someone who lived during the time would know, or wrote about things that historically wouldn't have happened yet. Now, internal criticism is the important part. Internal criticism looks at whether the writing matches other writings or events that were around during that time, and whether the person that wrote it was actually there or heard it from someone else. Every document that we take as truth has been studied heavily by numerous historians. So, what proof do we have? Lawrence Mictiuk is an associate professor of library science and Jewish studies at Purdue University. He is also the author of the 2015 Biblical Archaeology Review article that provides historical records of Jesus that weren't written by his followers. He says that there is no physical evidence of the existence of Jesus, but that it would be weird if there was. According to him, peasants don't leave any type of physical trail. Only kings and rulers would. To further prove this point, Bart D. Ehrman, the author of Did Jesus Exist? The Historical Argument for Jesus of Nazareth, said that the lack of physical evidence doesn't mean that a person never existed, or else any normal civilian throughout history wouldn't exist. It means that she or he, like 99.99% of the rest of the world at the time, made no impact on the archaeological record. Without physical records, we're left with writings from people who lived during the time of Jesus. The main and most detailed written evidence of Jesus is obviously from the New Testament, the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. These writings are viewed as biased towards his miracles and teachings. No atheist is going to read a Christian text to prove to themselves that Jesus was real. But writings from people that were biased against Jesus and his works also prove that he lived. In Lawrence's article, there are writings from Jewish rabbis that hated Jesus and what he was doing during his life. They believed that he was spouting magic tricks and teaching people crazy conspiracies, but they never denied that he was an actual person. Other writings from people that thought Jesus was out of his mind still detailed the events of his execution, including his judgment by Pontius Pilate, who, if you don't know, was the Roman governor that sentenced Jesus to die on the cross. Decades after Jesus ascended back to heaven, Roman and Jewish writers who thought Jesus was out of his mind still wrote the same events of Jesus' life and teachings that happened in the New Testament. This includes Flavius Josephus, a first-century historian and military leader. His 20 volumes of writings, Jewish Antiquities, are accepted by even non-believing historians as the most reliable and detailed source of information, where he mentions Jesus twice. A Roman senator and historian, Tacitus, detailed the burning of Rome in his account, The Annals of Imperial Rome, where he says that Christians and Jesus were blamed for it. The persons commonly called Christians, who were hated for their enormities. Christus, the founder of the name, was put to death by Pontius Pilate, procurator of Judea in the reign of Tiberius. There are endless other historical, non-Christian documents that also tell the story of Jesus' life and death, but you get the point. Even though there are many fact-checked documents that support that Jesus walked the earth, there are still skeptics. Take the American Atheists, yes, that's actually an organization, for example. Firstly, the article posted by the American Atheists, Did Jesus Exist?, claims that they doubt his existence because of the lack of physical evidence. According to the article, they said that influential people like Tiberius Caesar and Augustus Caesar have coins with their image on it, statues of them, and millions of writings that detail their every move. They ask, why doesn't any of this exist for Jesus? The answer to that is, people didn't think Jesus was that important. Jesus, from a non-Christian perspective, was just a guy. Did he have a big following? Yes. But was he in charge of passing laws, ruling over subjects, or drowning in endless riches? No. Even though Jesus had unfamiliar teachings that made big waves, he didn't have anywhere near the popularity of the literal ruler of the time. Definitely not enough for someone to make a statue of him. The American Atheists also say that any non-biblical sources that claim Jesus was a real man most likely just assumed that he was alive because the writers of the Gospels said so. One need not be surprised if, in the 2nd century, Jews did not think of questioning that assumption. They also say that there are some writers during the time of Jesus' life that say that such a man never existed, or if he did, that no one knew about him. This is talking about a document called the Patristic Summaries Series, which recorded a conversation between two men, Justin Martyr and Trypho. Basically, Trypho didn't believe in Jesus, and Justin was trying to convince him that Jesus was the Messiah. Trypho says if he was born and lived somewhere, he is entirely unknown. Although this seems like it tears down everything else saying that Jesus did live, we have to think about the context. Firstly, Justin is not trying to prove that Jesus exists, he's trying to prove that he was the Messiah, and that's a video for another time. Secondly, this isn't a record of a public or historic event, it's a conversation between two people who had a chance meeting. Even further than this conversation most likely took place somewhere between 155 and 167 AD, late enough to where neither of them had personally seen Jesus, but early enough that historical records of him weren't available to everyone like they are now. This is one chance conversation with one guy that says that Jesus didn't exist. The truth is, all the people that said they did see Jesus outweighs the one guy that didn't. So, what's the conclusion? The conclusion is that it's hard to ignore that Jesus was a real guy. Even people that thought Jesus was a mental case who put on elaborate but fake miracles knew that he was an actual living, breathing man. The amount of records that have been both externally and internally criticized have shown this fact, not to mention that the accounts in the Gospels of the Bible have also gone through this evaluation process. But again, we can get into that another time. The point is, we don't even need the Bible to show overwhelming documentation that he lived. Here are the questions that we're left with. Was Jesus the Messiah? Did he really perform all the miracles that were written about in the Bible? Can we prove it without the Bible? Like we said, this is a video for another time, so look out.